Okay, dear participants, so we go with a few minutes delay to the last block of the presentations today with Leonid Galaganov, Expressive Affordances of the 24 EDO in Christopher Trapani's work. Leonid Galaganov is a New York-based composer, improviser and multi-instrumentalist from a Russian old ritualist settlement, Estonia. Shaped by an eclectic background in jazz, classical, world and spiritual music, his music fits on a broad range of both traditional and experimental influences. Leonid is currently pursuing a PhD in composition at SUNY Stony Brook, did I say it right?
Yeah.
Where his research is mainly focusing on microtonality, multi-channel spatialization, and the exploration of new structures for improvisation. Previously, Leonid studied orchestral conducting at Tallinn University and holds a BM at Jazz Studies from New York University, as well as a MM in composition from SUNY Partch College. Please welcome Leonid Galaganov.
Thank you everybody for having me here. Good to be presenting part of the Ecumenical Society this year and to listen to everybody's presentations and to learn. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be misunderstood by most of the world in such a small and beautiful way. So today I'm going to talk about Christopher Trapani's piece for the Ecumenical Vocal Ensemble, which is in 3 movements, and it's 6 voices and electronics. And I'm going to focus specifically on one of the movements, which is kind of in 24 EDO, but more about that later. And I found this piece particularly interesting because it switches between different tuning systems, well, a number of them. And some sections are fluid in between tuning systems, and something like that to be performed by voices is quite rare. And what I really enjoy is that in the construct of the composition, Trapani chooses these tuning systems based on the words. And so the words of the text have expressive meaning, and there are certain kinds of tuning systems that he chooses, and I'm going to focus on why he makes those choices. And I'm going to start off with this part of the piece in the part of the second movement, which I think is the key moment, and I'm going to elaborate later on how everything I talk about is going to fit into like this part of these 2 measures here, which is kind of a constellation of the movement. And we can hear these 2 measures, or so these are 2 chords, 4 measures. Boxes above the notes, these are the 24 EDO approximations of the partials that are not indicated by me, they're indicated by the composer. And in this movement, this is the only place where the partials are indicated. And by the way, the notation is the Stein-Zimmerman notation, which is pretty standard, I guess, by its wide application in Sibelius and different notational programs, which you can see with the quatertones. And the fundamentals you can see are up in the electronics, where we don't have any boxes above them. So, you know, the presentation is titled Affordances of 24 EDO, but really in the second movement, this is, and actually in most of the piece, this is really almost the only place where 24 EDO is used. At least in this particular way, where we are hearing a fundamental, but this moment is by itself, it was a nice just intonation harmony, but I'm going to talk about the compositional narrative that highlights this moment in a way that we can feel the tension between different modes of hearing harmony. And as a brief overview, I'm going to talk about, actually the second movement is mostly an 8 EDO, and I'm going to talk about the idea of tone representation as an analytical tool based on Robert Hasegawa's development of ideas coming from Hugo Riemann to Teni, and then I'm going to focus a little bit on the second movement and very briefly on the third movement, and then I'm going to talk about the function of electronics and how all of those things really fit together and open up in these two measures that we've just heard. So briefly, 8 EDO is constructed by stacking neutral seconds for 3 quarter tones, and we can, just a brief demonstration, we'll hear this. Sustained, a lot of dissonance, imagine with a vocal sextet. So here, we can see on the clock phase diagram that this tuning can actually be represented as 2 fully diminished 7th chords that are superimposed on top of each other by a neutral second. Right, so I'm going to play this, what we have up here. And now together. So that's the predominant sonority of the piece. And we can see what kind of intros this tuning of 8 EDO affords us. Right? We can see these are in precisely 8 EDO what the cent amounts of each intro is, and then the closest approximation of the just ratio, and then the just names of the just ratios. And now I'm going to make a quick little detour to talk about tone representation. Basically, according to this development of this theory as posed by Robert Hasegawa, sounding intervals are representations of referential just ratios. So to explain what that means, I have a nice little example. Basically, we hear a major third on a piano, out of context, when it's played for us. A major third is 400 cents. However, in our ear, we hear that interval as a representation of the referential just ratio of 5:4. Even though in the overtone series, 24 to 19 is 404 cents, which is actually closer. However, we don't really hear that as a representation of that interval if it's played to us out of context. And so here are examples of different contexts. I'm going to play the first sound file and the second sound file. They're both in equal temperament, 12 EDO. So, here is 400 cents represented to us as 5:4. Right? And then here's a context we would hear that same interval as 24 to 19. Okay, so another, I know that we're just talking in general about how we hear intervals. Music theorists disagree a lot about whether this is part of nature, is something innate in the physics of sound, or if it's all acculturation or some combination of those. But for the purpose of this paper, I'm kind of assuming that this theory of Robert Hasegawa is useful. And basically, another thing that we can kind of hear in these intervals is that, for example, a 3:2 ratio contains with itself, you see in bold, 2 is an octave equivalent of the fundamental. 5:4 contains within it 4, which is an octave equivalent of the fundamental. And I would say that, I mean, this is my assumption, that there are two factors producing the sense of clarity and stability of an interval, which is the proximity of any audible interval to the referential just ratio that it represents, and this should have 2 in here, and the proximity of the prime numbers in the just ratio to the fundamental. Right? So even if we hear a precisely tuned 22 to 23, that's 70 cents, interval of 77 cents, we're not necessarily going to perceive it as 22 to 23 because those numbers are way removed from the fundamental. And you know, if we hear a 3 to 2 ratio that is really far off in the tuning, you know, we might still perceive it as a 3 to 2, but it's not going to really have that clarity like as a precisely tuned just interval has. And so if we look at all the intervals in 8-EDO, all the referential just ratios that these these intervals built on neutral seconds represent, we see that none of them have within them any numbers from the geometric sequence of 2, meaning the octave equivalents, right? So, and then as a comparison, right, any tuning system that will have within it a perfect fifth, a major third, major second, or minor second, even if they're not tuned precisely, the ratios, the just ratios within themselves contain something that we hear as a fundamental. That doesn't mean that if we hear like a major or minor scale that has major second or minor seconds, we're going to perceive them all as fundamentals. This is just here to make the point that within this tuning system, all the referential ratios in 8-EDO suggest fundamentals that don't exist in the tuning. So you see, for example, if we think of this C sharp and E as 6 to 5, the fundamental of this interval, we would our ear would suggest to us to interpret this potentially as an eighth, which does not exist in the tuning. So I call that whatever we hear in this dissonant space of 8-EDO, we're kind of being haunted by this possible myriad of phantom fundamentals. So this idea of phantoms is going to be a big thing here, and it's going to be related to the text. So the text in this piece, in every movement, is a sestina. So sestina is a poetic form which consists of 6 stanzas. Every stanza consists of 6 lines, and the kind of main point of the sestina that every line ends with end words, and every stanza has the same 6 end words that are rotated in a new way. And we'll see if that's confusing in the example in just a second, what exactly the text is for the second movement. The one thing that I want to add is also then the 6 stanzas are commonly followed by a 3-line envoy, which is a kind of a postscriptum. So the second movement sets this sestina by Sierra Shuttleworth. You used to love me well. Well, you, me, used love to well love. You used me. Me too, used well you. Love, love me. You, too well used love well. Me too. You used to love me well. And consisting of nothing but end words, arranged with a creative use of punctuation to unfold a different meaning with each rotation, Shuttleworth's sestina expresses a disenchanted atmosphere of obsessive rearranging of a fixed collection of fading memories in the barren ruminations of a narrator who is lamenting the loss of a love relationship. And just one note here that although the end words two and two are technically not the exact same word, but here Shuttleworth uses them as equivalents based on their phonetic proximity. So now I'm going to play the whole piece, and note these two spaces here. These are the two chords that we heard in the very beginning of the piece that are underlining this point here in the structure, and something, I mean, you know, I interpret this as like an obsessive rumination of a love relationship gone. And, you know, this isn't apparent from "you used to love me well," but, you know, you used me too, used, well, you, and then, you know, love me. I think there is a sense of loss, and I don't think that it's just like a witty rearranging, but there is a kind of sense of difficulty of finding closure. One thing to note in the grammatical tense here is that everything is in the past tense except this plea, love me, which isn't in the past tense. And so the piece is pretty short, it's 3.5 minutes. And another little note is that it will be very difficult to follow the text because there's electronics that are kind of echoing throughout, but here you can contemplate the text anyway.
True.
to note that in the score, actually every line corresponds to a measure. And in the form, there's a total of 39 measures. There are 39 words, 39 lines. And this is like the basic form where, every stanza, has 6 measures in it, but some measures, especially later on as the musical narrative develops, are truncated or augmented with a few beats here and there. And basically in the texture that we just heard, there are these 2 contrasting sections. So throughout the whole piece, the predominant sonority is this 8 EDO, very tense sound that is on a few occasions disrupted by these synchronized short attacks that introduce new pitches outside of the 8 EDO sonority, which are mostly borrowed from the 24 EDO set. So here's an example of the first, I call these like punctured chords, because to me they like this idea that Sierra Shuttleworth uses this very limited set of words that are rearranged. The 8 EDO set is a very limited set that is rearranged, and then the only thing that we have in the text that's different is this unique use of punctuation, which is the unique use of the punctuation with these chords that introduce new pitches. Here is the first and then the second one. First 2 chords that I showed in the piece that happen in the around the golden section of the piece, all of the other punctuation events like these, they introduce the new pitches not longer than a quarter note, so they are intended to be these synchronized punctuations. And so here on the overall formal narrative, we can see where exactly do these 9 total punctuation chords appear. And we can see that there is a logic to the pacing of them. I'm going to... so these are the 9 chords. And here what I have marked with the different colors are the new pitches. So the notes marked in black are the 8 pitches of the 8 EDO set, and then there are unique pitches that are introduced with the ones that are highlighted in color. And basically, the way that we hear chord 5 and chord 6, don't confuse the Roman numerals with any form of Roman numeral analysis, I just named them this way. These are the first 2 chords that are approximations of just intonation harmonies, where all the pitches fit nicely into exact partials that they approximate. However, having analyzed all of these other ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, I don't think that it's really suggesting any fundamental, but the function of these chords is, for example, chord number 1, it introduces this perfect fifth that doesn't exist in the tuning. However, it's really thinking of this F quarter, C quarter sharp as the perfect fifth. Thinking of F quarter sharp as a potential fundamental is really unlikely because of all these other pitches that kind of model the possibility of enjoying this as a sonority that gives us the fundamental. And we can hear just this chord, the perfect fifth in the top voice. And so here are the 9 chords as they appear. We can see that chords 5 and 6 that are the extended just intonation chords appear around the golden section there. And then no new pitches are introduced until the very end, which is in the last kind of formal part, the 6th stanza, which is superimposed with the envoy. And something that is notable here is that basically the 2 modes of listening is we're being frustrated throughout the whole piece by not being given a fundamental. Even when any kind of stable intro appears, we can't really hear it as like, okay, we can ground our ear into a sense of like maybe there is some tonal hierarchy until the first extended just intonation chord where the fundamental is given to us in the electronics. And then all the other notes are the 8 EDO notes that all of a sudden finally here make sense at this moment because now the 8 EDO harmony is grounded. And it's notable again where it appears in the structure with the text. And something also to note here is that these 2 chords, you see 4 and 9, they contain these 6-tone accidentals, but because they appear for like a quarter note and there's just 2 of these notes, I don't really think of this piece as like, oh, it expands beyond 24 EDO, like in its structural sense. I think of these as embellishments. However, they're placed in very carefully planned places, which is here, this first 6 tone accidental appears before we hear the extended just intonation harmony. And here in the last punctuation chord that introduces new pitches, it's a kind of foreshadowing of the 3rd movement, which is fully an extended just intonation. And in Trapani's liner notes, which he wrote himself in the CD in a sestina form, he notes about this 2nd movement. Sierra Shuttleworth's sestina was the perfect compact shape. Just 6 one-syllable words whose meanings shift as the spiral unravels. And I thought it would be kind of nice to give this spiral representation because I think that with this 6 stanza narrative, there's a sense that we're kind of always returning to the same place. And this does obscure like the order of chords in some way, unless we follow the line of the spiral and then they appear in the order as they should appear. And then superimposed over the 6 stanzas here is a kind of different harmonic formal organization. So there's one formal organization based on the text, another formal organization based on the harmony. See here, this line is a kind of A where we're introduced with this 8 EDO sound world. Then B is when the 8 EDO sound world starts being interrupted, and we expect that it's going to be interrupted with these new pitches. And C is the extended just intonation, brief memory of the sweetness of that memory that may have been an illusion of love, as emphasized in the text. And then, as we can see, after the 6th chord, we return to an A prime, which again occupies the 8 EDO sonority. And then from here on at the very end is a kind of return to B prime, where we're again introduced, where we again hear these chords that introduce new pitches, but with a much higher intensity. Comparing this 2nd movement to traditional narratives in music, I find it really interesting that the idea of home and otherness, sort of like, the 1 chord versus the 5 chord, like the 5 chord is supposed to be this place of tension, and the 1 chord is supposed to be the place of stability, and we usually kind of we're introduced into the sound world of the piece with a kind of stability that builds up into a tension. Here, the function of home and otherness are represented in an inverse, as the stable chords, like the acoustically stable just intonation chords, function as the place of otherness, which is at the most climactic point of the piece. And so, in the couple minutes that I have left, I want to compare now this to the third movement of the end words. And I'll play this excerpt for you. Here's the score. You can see I just chose this. This is kind of where the text picks up. We can see this is, by the way, a sestina by John Ashbery called The Painter. And you can see the amount of Helmholtz-Ellis just intonation accidentals that are introduced here. And you know, the text is a lot more, I mean, even though the text does refer to a kind of misunderstanding between the ideals of an artist and the surrounding world around the artist, it is a much more kind of lush language with a lot more color in it, as hopefully you can read there. I'll play a brief, this brief excerpt. Sitting between the sea and the building, enjoyed painting the sea's portrait. So he uses here the HEJI accidentals to indicate the precise scent deviations for any unique pitch in its overtone or undertone series up to the 49th partial, and as I heard yesterday, even higher now the system allows too. And while EDO systems approximate ratios from the overtone series, which are heard as representations of just ratios, the precise definition of pitches using HEJI accidentals aims for the just ratios themselves, not their approximate representations. When all the pitches in a vertical harmony are in tune with each other's overtones by the use of these accidentals and not approximating the simple ratios but actually forming them, the frequencies amplify each other and this enacts a striking resonance. In this way, conceptually, HEJI accidentals afford the unambiguous clarity of both the commonly recognizable intervals of the lower partials and the lesser practiced higher limit partials with exact precision. So for example, the difference between the interval 22 to 16 and 23 to 16 in equal temperament is approximated by exactly the same note. That is like a sharp 11 that's a quarter tone flat and the sharp 11 that's 27 cents sharper than an equal tempered sharp 11. So there's a 70-cent difference between those two pitches, and HEJI allows to identify them precisely. And the distinction between approximating just ratios with EDO tunings and indicating the exact pitches that form precise ratios is related to the tension between practical reality and idealism. For a performer, mastering 12 or 24 pitches on their instrument is much more realistic than orienting an infinite number of unique pitches in one overtone series, or even 49 as in HEJI, let alone when there is a progression of different series. As the subject matter of Ashbery's sestina deals with the rarefied sensibilities of an idealistic artist, the chosen tuning system affords refined access to higher partials, indistinguishable to the majority of ears as they may be. And yes, just a very quick note. The first movement is mostly in 12 EDO. There are a few embellishing microtones. The second movement combines 8 EDO and 24 EDO as we have seen, 2 embellishing 6 tones. Movement 3 progresses to a whole gamut of extended just intonation, refined pitches. And just I have a minute here to say something about electronics. They're pre-recorded and processed voices of the Ekmeli's singers, and they're mixed to 6 speakers, and they're triggered by one of the singers. The electronics, they cue the performers, because, right, how are they going to sing in 8 EDO comfortably? So the electronics, they function as like a fixed pitch instrument. And one thing to note is we've seen where did the pitch occur for the extended just intonation chord. It appeared in the electronics. And I like how the phantom fundamental that wasn't given to us in the 8 EDO tuning appears in the phantom of electronics, which is perceived experientially during a live performance as something that mimics and echoes the live singers through the speakers, creating a kind of hall of mirrors, pseudo-dialogue. And there's a kind of tension that arises from there because it's like not really a dialogue, these voices are pre-recorded, but there's a sense that we don't really know when the singers, where all the pitches are actually coming from necessarily. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And we'll use a couple of minutes for a couple of questions, and then we continue. Anyone, any questions, please? William?
I'm sorry, H-E-J-I, J-I just intonation, H-E is...
Helmholtz Ellis just intonation.
Yeah, I've heard it spelled hedgy.
Hedgy.
Yeah. Johan Ruawala says that, I think he had it from somebody, hedgy. Because otherwise H-E-J-I-S is complicated to spell. And I have heard hedgy. Hedgy.
I heard hell as well.
Yeah.
It's getting hard, yeah, maybe that's one. Richard, please.
Who were the singers? Because I'm just amazed that I've never dare like that for singers, but I mean, obviously they were capable. I mean,
yes, the Ekmeli's vocal sextet, they are New York based, and they are all...
What is his name? I spoke to him.
Jeff Gavitt.
Yes, and Richard, he's also a good friend of Richard. Yeah, yes, Jeff.
He used to be in the Load Bang Ensemble also. And, but yeah, he's also a composer, and they are actually comfortable with... I wrote a piece for Load Bang that used cent deviations, and they told me that they prefer hedgy because that's just something that they use as like common practice for them. So, yeah.
Okay. And that's last question, maybe?
Thank you. Maybe my question will be out and maybe stupid, but while I was looking at the poem or how it was translated, it seems to me that he used the last version, like the text was "Well to me, love used you," and then when I looked on the other rows, it seemed to me that this was always stable if I started by the first word "well," and this always gave me the meaning of this. Do you think this is totally stupid, or
were you suggesting you were reading it left to right?
Yeah, could you show the?
Yeah, actually, that I didn't remark. So I just did this for the purpose of space. But, in a book you would see this as stanza 1, and that would be empty space, and then you would see stanza 2 below it. So I rearranged it here so it just fits into the thing.
On the last row, "Well to me, love used you." Then we look on the first one, "Well to me, love used you."
Yeah.
And then the third one, and it's always the same.
Yeah.
So maybe this is how he structured it. I mean, like
in pitch-wise. Yeah, I didn't notice that kind of pattern in the pitch organization, but yeah, I also had an idea to. At first I didn't have those lines, so then I put them in there to try to delineate them. But yeah, because the sestina is a form which is exactly, it does precisely that, so you have a new end word for the first line of every stanza. And I mean, one of the end words that you previously heard at on other lines of the first stanza is going to be the first end word of every new stanza.
Yeah.
You know, I can't help but say, in the final envoy there, if you just put a comma in, how ironic. You used to love me. Well.
That's a good one. Okay, thank you so much.
Ironically, I've seen it written hell between people, like the head notation, because it's kind of a. But of course, it's not official.
It's a hell. It's a
It's
hell
a- it's a hell
to learn it.
Okay. I need some.
So Eleni Ralli received bachelor and master's degrees in composition, music theory and musicology from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in 2013, Basel Music Academy 2016-21, and Bern University in 2018, and a PhD degree in composition from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in 2022. Currently, she's proceeding with her PhD in musicology and artistic research at Bern University. Her research topic is the American composer Partch. We did two different presentations here. Oh, no? This is the third Partch presentation you do.
Harry Partch is my life partner, so
Yes,
you
yes.
always see Harry Partch
Of course,
as
yeah.
long as I'm alive.
Third time. And American composer Harry Partch, she has presented her ongoing research at festivals such as Fermentations Stage Basel, International Society for Rhythmic Music, Small is Beautiful, in 17, 19, and 21. She was here already 3 times. IGNM Basel and GMTH also in Basel. As a composer, she has won many prizes, attended many workshops, seminars, and master classes for contemporary music, and in addition, professional ensembles and festivals regularly commission pieces from her. Her works have been performed in Germany, the US, Spain, Ukraine, Switzerland, Greece, Poland, Israel, Austria, Iran, Argentina, Russia, England, Estonia, Thailand, and Italy. Her work, Go Within, for tenor saxophone, is released in Don Paul Kahn's homonymous solo album in 2021. She was a Fulbright scholar for the academic year 2021 and founding member of the Ensemble False Relations and the Extended Endings in 2019, dedicated to the performance of contemporary music. Please welcome Eleni Ralli.
Well, thank you very much, and it's the 4th time here, so actually they are 17, 19, 21, and now 23, and the research was a baby at that time, and now it's a PhD, and which, of course, you can find open source online. It's a kind of pseudo-Partch presentation because it's actually a presentation of Sefer's Venetia. I will speak about a piece of mine that I composed for the Partch instrumentarium. So, to start with, it's kind of what were the goals of my artistic PhD, and was like, I had to compose a piece, and I had to do the theoretical framing around it. So, that concerns like the Harry Partch, the composer, his system, his instrument, and his notation. I will go very briefly on that because I think that you all know who Harry Partch was, and he was well known for 3 identities that actually grew parallel: the one of the theoretician, the one of the instrument maker, and the one of the composer. And I think it's the first time non-equidistant 43 tones scale, no, not into. And we'll see here from 1 to 1 to 2 to 1, 1 octave higher. He has like 43 tones that actually have different steps within the octave. Now, the 1 to 1 for Partch was the tone G. So, and why that? Lou Harrison, a very good friend of his, says that he actually ended up with a tuning fork that was in G, and it fitted his voice. So G is the center of the tone. And according to that, of course, all the other ratios. Just to explain a little bit how his system worked, that you probably all know, he extended it to the 11th partial, like upwards what we call the overtone series. So this is a diamond marimba. It is his representation instrument. Of course, this, as earlier instrument, does not include all the 43 tones, that only the 29 primary tones. And for him, this reference all the bars in the middle that are actually 1 to 1, 5 to 5, 3 to 3, 7 to 7, 9 to 9, and 11 to 11 is the tone G. Now, going diagonally upwards, we always have the overtone scale with 1, 5, 3, 7, 9, 11, and below that we have the mirrored, the undertone scale. Okay, also extending to the 11th subharmonic, and every diagonally works the same way. Maybe I will try to exit that because and so that we hear a little bit how it sounds. Okay, yeah. As you can see, if I play all of them, they are kind of differently colored. The tones should be the same. Yes, thank you. This, of course, happens also in a diamond marimba with wood pieces. It is not exactly the same, and of course it has to do like where it's coming, because here is the fundamental, but here is the third, because it belongs to another table. So let's hear the first one. Idea to also see more or less how many of his instruments were constructed. They are constructed in this kind of harmonic basis, which are major chords plus 7, 9, 11, and minor chords plus minus 7, 9, 11, and a lot of other string instruments, pluck instruments like hexats in his guitars have the same system. So this is beyond the tuning system. Is also kind of it's a harmonic. It's also a harmonic system of the way he used the instruments. Now, let's go back to present review. Alright, now that we have everything, we see the instruments. This is the only instrument that actually didn't build himself. Okay, it's a rigged organ, and it is the most important organ because it has all the 43 tones tuned. It has a pretty much fixed tuning that does not change also with temperature. And you see that they have different colors that represent different ratios. So actually it's 6 octaves, and you can play about 1.5 octave in range. So what you have, we will go to the terms of notation, but this is a very important instrument for tuning instruments, but also because he composed a lot for voice, that the voice could practice on that. So anyone that would like to study Partch's repertoire should actually have access to the instrument, to have all the 43 tones. And of course, and this is very important, we will see why, you have to have the registers right, because it extends actually more than 6 octaves, but there are like different register combinations, plus you can have the thirds implicated, and then you can actually have the register from half, I think from 16 to 9 up and from 16 to 9 down. So there are like all different combinations that you always have to be aware that you have an instrument that actually cannot represent more than 1.5 octaves, so you always have to adjust. Now, what you will hear tonight or something, it's an adapted guitar. Actually, it's an unfretted guitar. He removed the frets. Okay, very easy. And of course, he did a lot of glides. He had these Partch roads, and this also reflects to this kind of chordal structures that are moved parallel up or down. And here we go to the super hyper instrument. This is the guitar 1. He has 2. This is the alto, the higher, and this there is the guitar 2. This is the bass guitar. Actually, it's a super 12 guitar, 72 string guitar that you have like 12 hexats going parallel, open strings apart from the 1, 6, 7, and 12, as you see, where the ratios are written, because they're close to the soundboards, you have a Pyrex roll that you can actually do a glissando. Open strings on the top, and of course, you know, the lower you get with a road, the higher the pitches go. Okay, so these are the only things that you can adjust, otherwise you play open strings. And of course, my first attempt is to decode what he's writing, and I'm putting a very random example so that you see some of the systems. And I don't know if you can see, but the adapted guitar, the first one, the instrument that I showed you, has actual fractions like ratios as pitches. So you see 6 to 5, you play 6 to 5. While the Chromelodion has a kind of tablature that it's the same for the voice, and it's actually, you don't hear that. You go to the keyboard, you play this with the right register, whatever comes, comes. You have to be right. Okay, so this is a piano tablature notation that only reflects the movement. And in order to go one step above that, like an extra tablature, you see here the guitarra, and actually you see spaces within the system, and then there are boxes with Arabic numbers. The number in the box below the chord means that you go to the 11th hexad or the 12th hexad, okay, or the first hexad, and then you either press all the strings simultaneously, like a chord, like the first measure of the second system, or you do an arpeggiate. Of course, here you have a very easy, and then you see that you have also melodies in different hexads. Of course, the sixth Partch is reversed. The sixth string, the lowest string that is close to you, is actually the upper, and the lower is the higher string. So many complications, and of course, later on in this passage, you also have the Pyrex rod movements that tells you in which ratio you have to push the, you have to bring the Pyrex rod so that the glissando is going on the opposite directions. And sometimes it's also very irritating because you see a glissando up, that means that you have to move that up, but the sound goes low. So very different tablatures, and here we don't have the time, unfortunately. It's an indication, but pretty much every instrument a different tablature. For me, as kind of I don't know, researcher, it was very important to know what is sounding, which is impossible here. You have to transcribe everything. But then when I put my hands on the instrument in real time, you realize that you don't need it. So actually, because the music, here, this corporeality, that you have the body memory, that you have to remember the movements and everything you have to do. So actually, if you see sounding pitches, it doesn't make any sense on the instrument. So he has like this theoretical aspect that he completely ignores, and this practical aspect that, of course, because he moved a lot, he pretty much lived in everywhere in the US, and he transferred all the instruments with him. He had to collaborate with different people, so he had to be able to put concerts together in a very short time frame, and sometimes from people that were not musicians. So you take the tablature, you know what to do, you do it, and if the instrument is tuned and holds the tuning, everything is okay. Otherwise, no control over that. So the thing is following that while I started studying the instruments in order to be able to understand what is happening and to compose the piece, I was not able, of course, there was at a later point to travel to the US to see the originals, but in 2013, Music Fabric in Cologne reconstructed the whole instrumentarium, so they had it in the house. The extra thing for Music Fabric, apart from the fact that they reconstructed the instrumentarium, is that they are actually trained musicians in the performance of contemporary music. So they got an instrument, they got to choose an instrument and learn to train that as a second instrument, but having knowledge of how you play an instrument. The only thing that they didn't have knowledge is things of notation-wise, tuning, okay, of course, how you tune your instrument. Of course, now they are it's 10 years, they are way more professional. And the thing is how to choose the instrument, because Partch had mainly percussion instruments and string instruments, actually pluck instruments. So here we see Ellen, that's interesting. As a flutist, she has to pick something that is completely out of nature. Of course, a percussionist, whatever you put, it's still percussion. A violin player, still there is that you can go to something that is very similar to the nature of their own instrument. here we have someone that plays something that is not existing as an equivalent. So I will play you some interviews about the challenges that they have in choosing instruments, dealing with rotation and other things.
My name is Helen and I play flute with Ensemble at the Ensemble Musikfabrik. My first choice of Partch instruments were the cloud chamber bowls because I wanted to be part of the percussion line. Partch has had such a wonderful sense of feeling of rhythm and polyrhythm that attracted me more at first than the actual tuning universe was his rhythm universe. And the sound of the glass gongs attracted me, and also the fact that it's a particular instrument that you don't have to be a virtuoso percussionist to play, because you can't hit them very hard and you can't really move around them very fast. Even a good percussionist, it's difficult because of the distances. And, you play squatting down and standing up. That was another thing that attracted me, is that it's a very active instrument. You're not just standing there and playing. You really have to go down low for the bowls that are low, and the high for the high-pitched ones. And I noticed, and I'm glad that I did that. I noticed when I have rehearsals where I play cloud chamber bowls, and then I go back to playing flute. Playing flute is such a static thing, and I'm tired and exhausted after a long rehearsal playing flute. But where I'm playing the cloud chamber bowls and being active, I'm less tired. So I think that was a good choice. But then I did become attracted to the string instruments of Partch, especially the harmonic cannons. Less so the kitharas. The kitharas are fascinating for me because of the number of hexads they have and the possibilities for tuning. But I don't really like the sound of them the way they are. Partch was constantly developing the kitharas. He went through many versions of them. He had a very primitive version, and his latest instrument, the Kithara 2, is a wonderful instrument. And had he lived longer, he would have developed it, and finally gotten the length and the width, the string sort of proportion right, so that it rings properly. It doesn't have the twang. But unlike the Kitharas, the harmonic cannons have a wonderful decay on their sound. A lot of it has to do with the fact that you have 11 strings pitched to the same instrument.
I'm Karl Rosman, the clarinet player with Musikfabrik. This is Harmonic Cannon 1. This is the instrument I play in Delusion of the Fury and in many other pieces. I chose it just because we were told to choose an instrument for the piece, and I listened to the recording of the piece and I heard the beginning of the piece, and I thought, okay, I'd like to make that sound, please. And nobody else had chosen an instrument already, so I got to make that sound. For Partch, the Partch notation system in a lot of Delusion of the Fury I've simplified for myself. He would write the numbers of the strings on the left-hand side, for example, which made a lot of sense to him because he had built the instrument from scratch and he himself knew what the string numbering was a lot clearer, a lot more internalised for him than it is for me. So, for example, there are some pieces, particularly the Misunderstanding from Delusion of the Fury, where I've rewritten what is written on the left-hand side of the instrument, so that it is so that I use Roman numerals for the groups of strings rather than 1 to 11 and such, or rather, 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 17 to 22, 23 to 28, 29 to 36, 37 to 44. Seeing those things, I was talking about automatism before, there's more of a time lag for me seeing those numbers than if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then I can just jump to the right zone on the instrument without having to think as clearly about 23 to 28. Oh, is that 3 or 4? So I do rewrite that particular passage, the Misunderstanding this is, so that it's clearer for me.
Very difficult to control. And for me it was very difficult to play the right octave, for example. So what is notated is what you have to do, not what is sounding. It's practical, but I have no control. for example, if I'm playing the wrong octave, there are completely other pitches, because the octave is divided in 43 parts. So maybe if I play here a C, and here a C, of course, it sounds completely different. And for me, I often make the mistake to have the wrong octave, and of course, then it sounds completely different and wrong.
So, for everyone interested, like all the transcription of the videos and other things concerning bibliography and publication, they are on my website. I have the Partch project tab. You can see the instruments, photos, things like that. I mean, you can discuss later. So, let's go to the parameters of my composition. Like, intonation is 1. 1 is I have an instrumental family that has 43 pitches per octave. And the thing is that they are coming fixed with the instrument if you tune it correctly. But then I have other instruments, okay, that although they can actually play more than 43 tones, they adapted a system after the 19th century that have like, they favor the temper system, like the frets in the guitar or the valves. And of course I have like instruments like the piano or the vibraphone that, of course, there are tempered instruments, and I have to find a way so that I mix it in a way that they correspond. The second thing, of course, is a representation of different timbres. Now, the timbres was a problem because here you don't compose for the instruments, but you compose for the people. I mean, if Helen can play the flute and the harmonic canon and the cloud chamber balls, I have this set of 3 that are attached to the people. I cannot put an instrument that is not performed. So for me, it limited back and forth the way, I mean, do I want to go from the Western musical instruments, do I want the flute, or do I want like to have the canons and the guitars and everything? So the instrumentation was unfortunately and fortunately on the other mix and match. It had to do with who person and what instrument is he trained. What I decided to do is that I would take 2 woodwinds, I have got the clarinet in the end, 2 brass, the horn and the trumpet. Okay, the piano, the percussion, violin and cello, and the Partch instruments that come along with them. We will come to that. And of course, the other thing is like, what am I doing with the registers? Because Partch actually, because he wanted to accompany the voice, had a lot of middle, lower range, but the extremes are missing. Of course, okay, this is also a situation in most of the instruments of the orchestra as well, but you have the possibility, which I didn't. So let's start from that. What I did with the timbre, okay, I have like a lot of timbre representations in the Western musical instruments, but Partch for that has a lot of different material, especially for his percussion instrument. He has glass, he has metal, he has wood, okay, he has a lot of other possibilities to play the instruments, like especially with the chordophones. He has like, we can have e-bows, we can have bows, we can have different plectrums, we can have fingernails, we can have like all this kind of different timbres. Going to the register, you see here the palette, you see that the middle area is reinforced. Then I have the piano, which I actually didn't have in the past because it's one very prominently tempered instrument that I didn't especially want to do. And of course we have also the chronology with the register changes, but the extremes are a little bit missing in this situation. The other thing is like, okay, I have 8 people on stage, they have to perform on multiple instruments, change their position. How do I fit them and what are the considerations? Unfortunately, in contrary with Partch's music that was rarely performed, it was more chamber music, this music has to be conducted. And then I had to consider a lot of practical consideration, like how people change instrument in real musical time, how they face the conductor, how they face the audience, how they don't block each other. So I ended up with this plan. Like internal circle, okay, we have like the violin, flute, clarinet, trumpet, horn, cello, and percussion. And in the second level and back to them, we have the Hardy Partch instrument that they are supposed to play so that I minimize the movements. And here you see like an actual representation of how it looked like. And of course, the other solution for me had to do with the structure and the duration. I had to make, because the piece was composed over 3 years, so I had to be sure like that I have all the different timbral representations, that I have like equal participation of parts, instruments and Western musical instruments, but also that I have combinations between them, that no one is double occupied. So I came up with a kind of series of miniatures that are divided in scenes, that are the main musical events, and transitions that are they're of minor duration but not of minor importance, because they are the musical bridges that connect the material between the scenes, but also give time to people to change their positions to new instruments. So as you see, and we will come to that, there is actually a mathematical also. First of all, I have to say that every cycle is starting with the lowest instrumentation from solo and ends up either with septet or octet, which is for me the highest instrumentation, because I have so many people that can play 8 instruments at the same time, from the 22 in total. And around the transition to scene 9, which is actually the middle of the scene, to the transition to scene 11, that are the 2 times that the solo cello is playing, there is kind of a mirror structure reversed to the bass, to the edges. So, of course, the duration was very important for me to know exactly how much you have time to proceed to the instrument or to have a form growing. But if you actually, the calculation is so that from the 1.5 fifth of the piece, I have Western musical instruments, 1.5 fifth I have like Partch instruments, and the other 2 fifths are combination of the instruments. Now to go a little bit to the texture, but also to the tonal material, you see here, and also let me finish I think, where I have like one instrumental body, that is the harmonic canon 1, that is played by 2 different players to the left and right side of the strings. And you see here that I used pretty much the tablature that Partch used. There is a glissando from string 1 to 44, all across and back. And of course, then I have the approximate pitches with a microtonal notation that unfortunately it's wrong, and I'm aware, because I have approximations in 12 of the tones that they don't work very well in non-equidistant system. But it's very, very easy for a conductor or for someone to control where they are. Additional, I give the ratio on the top so that you know exactly if you want to calculate where you are. And I use this element a lot, that I have different sized intervals, like here I have 2 different sized thirds, that of course I have a syntonic comma difference, but actually they are not running in the same circle, because the one has a repetition every 1 measure and the other one has a repetition every 3 beats. So you have always different things sounding together. And this kind of textures, micro movement textures, is a very basic textural characteristics, and this is also the beginning of the piece, so let's hear that. Because if you have them sounding at the same time and in a close position, you have beatings. But if you have more of them, more thirds, and you spread them also in different octaves, okay, or some put them very close together and spread them, you have clusters where the beatings are not longer. Very easy to take into consideration. So here we come to the second structure, timbral, okay, movable or hold it pedal note, okay. That is actually transferred from instrument to instrument, while this kind of cluster-wise chords are appearing. element 3, all or the most possible of the 43 tone scale. This comes 2 times. This is the first representation, which of course we said that it's the Diamond Marimba, so it doesn't have the 43, but it doesn't have to have all the 43, but to represent and chord-wise like what Partch wanted to do. And the second one is in the mirrored scene, that is the scene 10, which is played by the trumpet. So I had it one time by an instrument that is made to play that, and one time by an instrument that is actually not made to play that. High virtuosic movements. Actually, this is written for one percussionist, but in the 2 to play it in the end. Beginning, which we probably will not have the time to hear, so I will go faster to the other, and we will hear a longer piece from the end. Here I have a representation of the voice. The whole Harry Partch's inspiration for his system is the human voice. He wanted actually to be able to represent with instruments the inflections of the voice. But for me, I didn't want to use a voice because I thought that it sounds like the instruments carry a quality within them apart from the tuning system, and then that I thought that if I put a voice, then it would be, again, would never be able to escape that. And on the other hand, I didn't want to have something more prominent than the instruments itself, because then I thought that it would take a little bit the light out of the protagonistic role of the instruments, and they would become more a means of accompanying the voice. But I used the cello, who is playing all through the composition, to have this kind of small inflections representation. It's like singing of the voice. And as you see, I have different sized intervals, okay, with false kind of higher and lower impressions by playing harmonics or even multiphonics, and having bow vibrato, and then changing between 6th and 8th and quarter tones, which actually is a melody that is descending like by 1 octave. So it's it has all this kind of voice inflation fudge representation. And to come back a little bit to the tonal material and what I said in the beginning about the concentration of intervals, I'm showing now the scene 11, which has a title that Partch used for his last piece, that was a piece that made for a documentary film like 2 years before he died. It's called The Dreamer That Remains. And this scene is called like that because it has only Partch instruments, no Western musical instruments are participating. And I thought that it's a very good way to play with different fifths. So the way is like either I use the fifth on the same instrument, okay, harmonic or melodic to the same instrument, there is a line that is going. Harmonic, timbral with 2 different instruments, or melodic with 2 different instruments, and then a combination matrix. You see how many fifths that actually are from, I will say from the minor fifth, from the 16 to 11, to the biggest fifth here that is 84 to 55, but how many different combinations I can have. And depending, for example, if you have the 3 to 2, sounded together with the 40 to 27, then you have a syntonic comma, then you can hear the vibrations. But if you have more of them, or if you have all of them, then you have this kind of cluster-wise chordal structure. And I will show you how it works. So you see here it's the harmonic and the melodic on the same instrument. Okay, we have the first is the harmonic canon, so you play on the 3 strings. The other are the cloud chamber balls, that are this kind of glass conchs, that you play one after the other. Then here you see how it starts is changing timbral, going from instrument to instrument. And here we have to start with the matrix, that you see like how they are going both, okay, all the directions, like harmonic wise but also melodic wise. And here of course it goes everywhere. So I would like so that there is a little bit not out of context, and if I have like 4 minutes, which I do, to play you a little bit of a bigger aspect of the piece that starts actually with a solo cello. The transition to scene 11 and it comes to this, okay, and introduction, so it's if you have the time.
Yes. And we don't have too much time because we are 2 minutes still a little bit behind today, but getting better. Maybe 1 or 2 questions, and maybe in between, if you, I'm sure you need things to prepare.
Yeah.
Do you need any help? I can help you with the preparations. And so, any questions, please? David?
Just a quick one. What ratio was this very high major third that was occurring? Was this kind of low minor third, which I suppose was 76 kind of? And this very high major third that occurred very often, also in the ending now. What ratio was that?
I have to see the score and you show me because I don't remember by heart.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay, but the H1 to 64 you mean?
Was this in the tuning?
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Yeah, maybe it's
but if you show me exactly what you mean, because I don't remember everything by heart. Yeah.
I have to say that was the first time when I had a guitar right tuned. The ensemble of Mozarteum does not care about the tuning of these instruments, but now it was very.
No, they do and they learn it, but the problem is.
Did you teach them to tune it?
I mean, I think it was both ways because I learned that 72 strings. I did the whole. I restringed all of them in both guitars and tuned them alone in Seattle in the original one, which is. I needed literally like 10 hours for one. All the strings broke. I was so pissed off. But when you tune the 72 and Partch says like you have to balance every hexad with the other one. I mean, it's kind of a drama. But when you put the 72, the first one is out of tune. And then you have to start again. So it's really it's not for a very tempered Greek woman.
How many did you give?
A lot. You have to ask Charles Corey. He was like, he will send me the bill. I killed many, really.
One last question, and please again.
Is the tuning with the 43 tones constant, or can it be transposed?
That's a very good question. So, Partch was accused of having a by Ben Johnston, actually, his student, that he has a closed system that does not allow modulation. But he has a lot of pitches that are outside the 43 tone scale, and especially with the glides, because then you can go beyond that, because if you transpose a chord, sometimes you don't. And he put always the most approximate ratio to one tone that he had in the 43 tone system. But no, the answer is between in the middle. You cannot modulate, but you can have like other tones within the 43 tone system that go beyond that. So yeah, G is always 1-to-1, and then all the relationships are applying to one central tone that is the tonic. That's the thing. But yes, you can have more than 43 tones.
But I think
okay, maybe before the concert we can continue this, because we are almost 10 minutes still behind, but we're going to be very close to each other.
We are 5 minutes behind, please.
No, 10 minutes. 6 minutes. I was born in Spain. I have to exaggerate. Okay, we go for the last question.
Just make a comment, because Ben Johnston, he himself sometimes used closed systems, but then he, even in those pieces, he was modulating and having part like in the piano suite, it's tuned in one key, but then the 5 different parts are all in different tonal systems and keys. So I guess 43 would allow even more a variety of keys with just different shadings and different intros.
But he didn't do it. He didn't use it that way. Everything is like, that's why I told you it's the hexads based on G. But of course you can do it, but then you will have ratios that are outside.
Yes, I have to do the transfer.
So take care about your phone.
Yes, take it to the concert, please.
But you can do it. I mean, you don't see anything else taking the part of the phonics within another system. But I think that unconsciously he did it, because when you transfer, you have this structure happening, but he didn't use it as a compositional element, if I answered the question. Okay.
Careful.
What do I have?
No, you had the adapter on your
You can take out my... Yes.
I will take everything with me, all the projectors.
Okay. Do you need projector or anything, Karin?
I have my computer, so I will be projecting, and there's a very small audio fragment.
Thank you very much, Eleni. So Karin the Fleyt, welcome, thank you very much. She's a renowned international flutist specialized in contemporary classical music. She collaborates with many composers, always looking for innovations, including 10 years with Karlheinz and Stockhausen. Karin is flutist of Hermes Ensemble and freelancer in various orchestras and international ensembles. Together with Karlheinz, she founded the New Flow, focusing on new repertoire for low flutes. Karin taught flute at the Leeds Conservatoire and is lecturer for educational master's program at CASC and Conservatorium Ghent since 2009. At the Royal Conservatoire of Antwerp, RCA, Karin is coordinator of research group Corporeal and chair of the woodwinds department, teaching contemporary music repertoire. Research from zero to what, creative encounters between Mary Bauermeister and Karlheinz Stockhausen, Sonor Continuum, a look at intermediate instrumental theater with Lucien Gothals. Karin is currently doing a PhD in the arts on perspective on time in the music by Stockhausen, the experience of the performer. Please welcome Karin the Fleyt.
Thank you very much. I realize I'm the last speaker today, so I will also intersperse my lecture a bit with playing so that we have a bit of different approaches to this lecture. It was also very nice to see Helen, my colleague, in your presentation, and especially for her not playing the flute, because I know she really likes this lecture. Okay, so the lecture that I want to do is, as Agustin already said, about Karlheinz Stockhausen. I will address his use of microtonality, which of course coming from the 50s, 60s, the electronic music, and then later on, let's say halfway the 70s, with the start of his big opera cycle, Licht, was very much based on the instrumental use of microtonality. I specifically chose one of his solo flute pieces, which is called XII. XII is actually a Greek letter. So XII refers to what you could say unknown quantities, and I think this probably sums up as well today's wonderful presentations where we talk about the unlimited possibilities, temporal possibilities, as well as mathematical possibilities that we can have in the microtonal world. It's getting really loud inside. No, it's not too. I don't know. Maybe it's too warm to you. I think it's coming from here actually. Okay. So, C is then a part of, as I previously said, the opera cycle Licht, which took Karlheinz Stockhausen 26 years to compose. So this is a massive oeuvre. And the piece of C is one little compartment of his super formula that he used. I'm not going to analyze this whole formula because there's lots and lots of information to find around that. The only thing in C, he's trying to superimpose three different formulas, or three different characters in the opera, mainly being Eve, Eva, Michael, Michael, and Lucifer. And in this particular piece, which lasts 6 minutes, he's kind of jumping from one character to the other, using fragments of the formula. And in his introduction of the piece, Stockhausen mentions that through the use of as many as 7 steps within a minor second, the sense of time and space is lost, and a strange state of suspension is reached. Now, this particular piece, C, is not necessarily written for the flute. It can be played on any melody instrument or even a synthesizer, as long as you can produce microtones. So it would be really interesting to see how different composers, instrumentalists deal with this piece. And although I played on a normal flute, no microtones, no extra keys on the instrument, I also play this piece on the alto flute, and I have a microtonal alto flute, but I didn't bring it because of luggage restrictions, where we have extra keys. So this is an alto flute made by Eva Kingma, which is a Dutch flute maker. She's very, very known to make all these micro instruments, and you basically have extra keys, meaning that the whole position of the tone holes of the flute had to be different, so that we still can have as well as chromatic music as microtonal music. So in a way, when I play this piece on an alto flute, I feel these unlimited possibilities to make even more than the 7 steps that Stockhausen is talking about, but also at the same time I feel a bit of a restriction, because we only have 10 fingers, right? And we don't even use them all because we need to support our instrument as well, meaning that for some of those extra keys that Eva came up with, Eva Kingma, we need to jump from one key to another, and that kind of results in a very broken and not smooth line that you create. And that is very much against, let's say, against the philosophy of Stockhausen, where he wants really to use those microtones, or micro steps as he calls it, as a very smooth transition from timbre to timbre, which I will also demonstrate in a bit on the flute. As Agustina already said, I'm doing a doctoral study for the moment, where I'm specifically focusing on how we transmit that sense of time as a performer. I'm not at all a composer, so really from my point of view, how we transmit this. But what is transmission? What kind of time layers can I use, and what kind of tools do I use to export these time layers to an audience, for instance? So that is basically what I'm working around, and I'm at the stage now where I interview lots of people, either performing Stockhausen works, but not necessarily, but more specifically on their sense of time. And with sense of time, this can mean a lot, of course. This has already also been said today, when we talk about being in a state of flow, as Csikszentmihalyi. That is, of course, a sense of time where we lose time, where we kind of lose self-consciousness in a way, where we transcend time. That's a way of using this time, and this is definitely in this piece of music. But it's also about, when you learn a piece of music, this complicated, how you deal with the different time meters, the different tempo scales, because Stockhausen also uses a chromatic scale of tempos that you can divide in 12 and then subdivide, where you end up in strange tempos at first sight, like 37.5, for instance. How do you incorporate that as a performer? So that's also to do with sense of time that I need in this focus. So talking about temporality, because this can mean very different things, and also different ways of approaching it. If you're a composer, or if you're a performer, if you're a listener, I've found less evidence or less works around this from the point of view of a performer. And so I kind of started just writing what time elements I find essential as a performer, and especially when I perform Stockhausen's music. So you can see that the 2 green oval circles are kairos, so the momentum, the now, and then the other end, the timelessness. For me, they are not that far away as sometimes we we think. And I'd like to feel or observe whilst playing that those two elements are actually something that I can grab, and hopefully also being involved in transmitting that, in the transmission of those elements. So those, just to show, are the things that are happening whilst I'm, for instance, playing C or other works by Stockhausen. Okay? And what is the actual aim for me? I already talked about this, the loss of self-consciousness, and I find it important not to trigger that only by myself whilst playing, because one thing, for instance, is that all music by Stockhausen needs to be played from memory. This has to do with the music theatrical aspect of the piece, but also to kind of turn in a different world, a transcendental world, where the timelessness that we saw in the mind map is very present. And in order to get there, which is kind of an achievement as a performer, you could say, you have to really push boundaries and find a way that you recognize yourself in a performance. So this is what we also call an autotelic action. So the self is the goal, so to say. So that's something that I wanted to aim for, to trigger that loss of self-consciousness while playing. And then we come to the first line of C, and so this part of the piece, when you start making a realization of this, because you cannot just fill in these glissando lines. I mean, you can, but you have to be very exact in the timing, because as you can see, 1 quaver equals 8 seconds. So your starting awareness of time is already very defined. And we need to kind of split that up into manageable time fragments, so that you really feel you're doing everything that is asked for in this form. So maybe I can just play a little bit, if I do from the start, maybe up to here to the fortissimo, without showing you already the realization. We have something like this. If we look at how we can actually divide this, for instance, the fourth from F to C under, we come up with something like this, where you see this. And what this specific player, Katinka Pasveer, who has actually premiered all Stockhausen's flute repertoire, did, she, to memorize it as well, divided this in proportions, quintuplets, 8 notes, so that she kind of could run through a certain pattern. Of course, when you then say, what I said at the start, I also play this on an alto flute, extra keys, extra notes, so I can fill in with even bigger. I'm currently making a realization to publish, to kind of have the 2 ways, and there's of course many different ways. But this is a realization that is played most often, let's say, by Katinka Pasveer. So you can actually buy the score with the realization of Katinka, so that you have a starting point. But again, it's about finding unknown quantities. So already in '86, when Stockhausen wrote this piece, it was to do about how can you try and find and find the boundaries and make it even more unknown for yourself. So there's always a bit of work involved in this. Okay, let me just play that first line again. And although we have a lot of extra noise, it would be interesting for me for you to observe what happens in this microtonal world in terms of the transmission. So how you feel, this is of course a very tiny excerpt, how you feel about my sense of time and maybe your sense of time at the end of a very long day with heat and noise.
Excuse me, is it possible to close that here?
I was thinking about it.
Yes.
It's here, it should be there.
Close the window. Window. Fenster. Dachfenster.
So now you will sleep even more. Okay. That's the first one. I do it one more time. So that is actually stretching out that very small compartment that you use for the score. Let me see where we are.
Sorry, but can you play the F and E and that only half step in a quintuplet part?
To play the F?
No, it's that part.
Sorry?
Quintuplet, I think. It's the quintuplet from F to E.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to imagine this is. I was thinking of playing the complete piece, and I'm happy that I actually did not choose to, because first of all, you need an environment that is acoustically organized to play it. Then often there is amplification for it, so that you really hear out all these minor steps. But I try to exaggerate a little bit, because one of the things is he didn't really want what I just showed to kind of break down all those steps, because then of course you lose any gliding or transition that is meant to be or to happen. But just as a demonstration, of course, that can help. In what I am for the moment researching, I try to see how this work and this whole performance practice, you could call it, is inherent to the embodied experience of a performer. And we heard that already a little bit this morning. And that kind of, for me, was nice to hear. This is something that different people are actually doing. So I'm specifically interested at what is that intersubjective time. Although you have very strict notation and you have to deal with time elements and different layers, etc. Even if you kind of exclude all that, there is still this intersubjective time, because my feeling of time is different than yours. Sometimes we match and we have the same, not always. So yeah, that's why I find this piece specifically so interesting to see. And also I find that it is something that is often taken for granted. This kind of intersubjective time and feeling, this what I call tacit knowledge, where we cannot just underline it or underpin it. It's something that comes through using it and working on it. So I thought this is something of a goal. And what I do is, as I've said, I go to different interpreters, asking them questions to find out about their feeling of time, their temporality, so to say, that they use. And one of the questions is, what is the relation between the experiential temporalities, such as remembrance, timelessness in music by Stockhausen, and the embodied experience of a performer? Because if you hear this work C by, let's say, 3 different flute players, you will of course hear 3 different versions, although it's so minuscule written out. So what does that embodied feeling do? What is the transmission of the player, the performer at that time? So that's my first question. And the second question that I asked them is, how can experiential and embodied knowledge enhance a performance perspective on temporality and intersubjective time? So the two, of course, are necessary to being able to perform pieces like this. So these questions I pose to students that I work with, who work on Stockhausen's music or temporal pieces in general, but also performers that I work with, colleagues in the ensemble, and Stockhausen experts as well. Yeah. So that's what I'm mainly doing. In the piece itself, and these are also things when I worked with Stockhausen that he was very much stressing on this. In the performance you will hear how time awareness will be stretched throughout the entire piece using microtonal steps, and then small tone intervals that take a very long time to glide, but also bigger intervals that are filled with the tiniest progression between 2 notes. And that is what Stockhausen calls micro steps. And coming back to that first line that I projected here, the yellow vertical lines are actually, when you do realization of the piece, or when you use Katinka's realization, you have a whole page just for that 3 first passages. So it takes a while to get through everything. And of course there is the matter of the different dynamics as well, and the different tempo relations that are there. Because Stockhausen was really convinced that you can, using a chromatic scale in tempo, you can actually internalize this and be very exact. And he often tested us on this, checking if we were in tempo 81 or 75, for instance. So that is something, that intrigues me to be really performing in this piece. I come to another place in the score where all of a sudden there is an extra line where we have to sing, sustain 1 note, in this case Fa, F, and whilst doing those micro steps. So this is something, of course, that refers again to his filtering and manipulating in electronic music, but then through a wind player. So I thought it's maybe also nice to hear and see what you think. Of course, at some places there is this beating, at some other places there is not. So we heard that a lot also today, or today, when those different partials come together or go back and forth. This is something in a very acoustic way, without any filtering or whatever, can happen. Again, this will be very much enlarged when you amplify the flute and you have a proper concert hall with no other noise in it. So he uses that a lot throughout the score, the singing as an extra means of finding this temporality layer again. As you can see, there's many fingerings. So all these things are the fingerings, kind of traditional way of of fingering charts for the player, which of course now, today, would not be up to date anymore, since we have this extra flutes like Eva Kingman's flute, but also others who are making microtonal flutes. And we also have the Glissando flute by Robert Dick, where you have this device on your embouchure and you kind of glide forward and back.
Wow.
And you can actually shape your distance if you want to have a fourth being filled with the glissando, or if you want a third, or you want a perfect fifth, you can actually do that. So that is something would really be very interesting to come up playing XII with that in mind. So it's something that if Stockhausen was still around, I think he would be very interested in seeing how things develop and how these unknown quantities can still be unknown because we develop in that way. Okay.
Can I ask you something, sorry, a little bit, because I cannot see very well and I don't have that any score. It looks like many of them, they are the same fingerings, right?
So there is a bass that is the same, for instance here, but then the change is in the little finger.
Okay, because I cannot see really if there is a change.
There are different pads.
Okay. And also, whenever you play a normal fingering, he doesn't mention that. It's only the fingerings in between that is in the score.
So you talked about the glissando flute. Anybody have played this special with glissando flute, or it's your imagination now?
Well, they haven't done it. I have tried it when I was at the NFA convention and Robert had his glissando flute. So my first thing was, I need to try XII on this flute, and I was completely disorientated. So
because I think it would be a completely different arrangement for the glissandos.
Can I ask you something else? Would it be if you ever tried it? I mean, I would also go with the fingers, although not being a flutist. But if you try to do it with changing the ankle, and does it work the same?
That's a very interesting question, because for some of the fingerings, for instance, between the semitone F and E, you have to actually adjust slightly with the embouchure. But of course, every flute player has a different embouchure. So this is something you cannot put in the score. You can almost not notate, because it might work for me, but maybe for Helen it will be completely different.
No, if just keeping the same fingering and only adjust the ankle would have the same effect.
If I try that, for instance, at the start of this number 5, what happens is that the dynamic shape goes with the change of angle, so you kind of lose that continuity of dynamic. So in some parts it might work in some parts, but not generally. Because as soon as you cover, you lose, or you get less sound because there's less air.
I'm sorry, may I also have one question, because you mentioned that this piece is realizable by any flexible tuned instrument.
Any melody instrument.
For, let's say, violin. How would you do the singing with the violin?
That's of course. Say again?
Doing a small vibrato.
You could work with a vibrato, indeed. So not singing, of course, because it will not mix with your sound. But you can definitely use a vibrato, or also have different bow pressures to kind of enhance that quality of the sound. But that's an interesting.
Across two strings, maybe just unison, just slide on the fingers.
So my question is, Stockhausen did not want these intermediate pitches be intermediate, but like a discrete microtonal pitches.
Exactly. So you really have, if you say I'm going to learn this piece and start from scratch, you really have to start with the kind of original version that I showed at the start, which is this, and then kind of measure out how long do I need to go from this F, this high G, in relation to the tempo, knowing that a semiquaver lasts 4 seconds. So then you need to calculate that and then see how can I fill this without it being in steps or sounding in steps. There are steps, so we shouldn't hear them. And you always like to add some punctuations. We've also heard this term today. Yeah.
Do you have used the metronome for to get this very precise tempo marks? Because I imagine it would be quite complicated to learn that. Or
yeah, actually, you have to learn this with the metronome to be really precise. But you can either make a click track, just going through everything.
Making a click track with electronics, they are capable to make the changes, and then then you can learn it very precise.
Can learn it very precise, but then of course that is a very technical approach. So that's kind of a first step, but then you have to get rid of all that and
later then after memorizing.
And internalize that feeling. That's also what I mean with the time sense. So when you hear a glissando, we are not necessarily thinking in steps, or maybe sometimes we recognize, we're going to the D, or we're going to, but in between could be a fast tempo, could be a slow tempo, which should not be noticeable from the audience.
Glissando has the idea, it has a beginning and has an ending, and in between it is continuous.
Exactly. As is in electronic music, I think we need to always think about an acousmatic approach that Stockhausen had to all of his acoustic pieces, be it for flute, for trumpet, violin, whatever instrument.
I have one question. If it's for the played by the alto flute, will it sound a fourth lower? Or?
So he says here, alto flute, quarter lower, but you cannot see it.
Fourth lower.
So it sounds a fourth lower. Klingt quarter tiefer.
Last question, because there was a question as well. I haven't moderated.
No, sorry, I didn't have a question. No.
I did not.
No, it's just stretching.
No. It's just like if you think that because the second version of the flute, Berezek has exactly the same rhythmic and he changed it. So do you think that he was inspired of that?
He was definitely inspired because Katinka actually lived with Stockhausen, so they had the advantage of her trying out and him listening and then saying, I didn't realize you could do this, or I don't like that, can you do that? So there was always this kind of dialogue, meaning that he often changed things. And he did that throughout his life, working with clarinet players, trumpet players, pianists, all the time. And that also means that often the scores are only published after several versions until he says, this is the version I want to have on paper, so to say. So that's another thing.
I mean for the metronome, only for the indication that this value is this metronome indication, because the only thing that I came in the beginning was like the value of sequencer, but it's exactly the same.
Well,
it looks very familiar.
Of course, everything is based on this super formula where the tempo scale is set. So it's not a coincidence that we have to have Kraber equals 8 seconds, because in that formula that he used for 26 years, that specific interval lasts that amount of time. So he's very rigid in that. And as a performer, it's kind of important to deal with that rigidity or that sense of time that there was when composing it, but then translating it to the sense of time that you have as a performer. And that's what I'm trying to talk about today. That's another example. I was just saying about the punctuations, little interspersed moments, like here, where he wants us to remind us of the starting note. Remember the F, that this is kind of still ringing, this is still there. So that means into that smoothness is one moment that you could say the Lucifer moment, where it goes against the nice shape that you create. Yeah. So again here, this is Katinka Pasvir's realization. So she divided it in groups, but then there's a beaming so that she knows if you are in tempo 60, I have to play it before the beat or after the beat, or with it. So it's just a way of making it practical for yourself as a performer, but it's not a necessity. It's her way of doing it. So as I've said, this piece needs a certain setting. It's part of the day Monday, which is the green day, because we were talking about colors earlier on. And so it's about Eve, who is the figure, the mother figure, the earth figure, the kind of gathering figure who's keeping all the other characters in the opera at peace. She tries. It's very, very difficult, but she tries. And at a certain moment, it's kind of a standstill in that scene of Monday. For every day there is like a introduction, you could say. There is then the opera, it lasts a couple of hours, and there is always a gruß, a greeting, a kind of postscript, you could say, to the opera. And this is XII. This is that moment where you say farewell to Monday before you go to the next day. So that means there is a nice moon shape projected with the projector, and the flutist stands before that. So you see all the shadows of that moon, and you also have to move in certain ways. For instance, at the end you have to make that moon circle shape, so you can imagine that the moon is behind you and the shadows. It's quite atmospheric. So that's the reason I also didn't want to play the piece as such, because then you don't get a nice idea of what it is. But I have a little snippet that I found when I played this in Milano, and it's very short, but it gives you an idea of the setting. I need to exit, of course, to be able to. That's actually it. Are there any more questions or comments?
Sorry, what does intersubjective mean?
Intersubjective, there's different meanings for it. The way I see it is you have subjective time, that you say, I feel it this way, you feel it that way. You have also what I call intersubjective time, where I mean the time at this moment when I play, the sense of time rather, kind of relating that to you. So it's an interaction of subjective time, in very short.
So you hold the audience, you sort of try and make time feel longer for us, or try and make things go faster, or whatever. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
More questions? I have, but I will ask after this meeting. Can I ask?
Yes, of course, please.
I have two questions actually.
Yeah.
One is a practical one, and one is about Stockhausen. Practical one is, as long as I know, the very high partial flutes are kind of overblowing. And then if you have those kind of descending microtone lines, is it mostly by the fingerings, not just only by the fingerings, but not using the lower partials or the embouchures or anything?
No, it's definitely a combination. So you need to also overblow to get to the right octave. For instance, when I was playing that high G, if I wouldn't overblow, I would definitely jump.
go slowly down.
Yeah.
It's just by fingering.
No, it's also keeping that airstream there. Otherwise, it wouldn't help. Yeah. So it's a combination always of the two. Yeah. And he uses lots of rushing noises, aeolian sounds. Where, of course, if you just blow into the instrument, you always get low kind of pink noise. So also there you need to adapt if you want this in the higher octave. But we still hear that quality of a third octave G. Yeah. So that's an example where you really have to help with the embouchure. Yeah.
My second question is, I'm not a Stockhausen specialist, but you are, so this is my question. Although his music is super logical and there's a close relationship between these ratios and his pitches and all the harmonies, and so continuum of those things, what I believe is that he did not extensively use the microtones in his music. So are there like a multiple repertoire that he explored of the microtonal music? Because as long as I know, Boulez and Stockhausen really did not intentionally focus on the microtonal music at any point.
I think one important thing is that he was very much inspired by Eastern music. So that is a lot of his influence, and also spending his time in Osaka with the World Exposition and hearing there the different orchestras, and then the other things, the Gagaku orchestra and all that. He was very much inspired for that, and then tried to see what can I do with my Western knowledge into that. And the other thing is, of course, being a pioneer in electronic music, where it's very common to shift from higher partials to unaudible pitches. That combination was for him important to see how can I do this with acoustic instruments. So definitely.
Maybe I can add, we see in the beginning of his career in the electronic music, so there's this very famous both pieces, Studio 1 and Studio 2, and in Studio 1 we can say it's constructed from just intonation in some way, because he used rational numbers, and then in Studio 2 he is using equal division, what was the 25th equal division of the interval of number 5, that means 2 octaves and major third, if I don't make a mistake now.
I think in Stimmung he serialized partials that you can get with the voice. Besides Stimmung.
4 years ago we had here in this festival a beautiful performance of Stimmung. Okay, you please.
So I have a question.
Okay.
Do you know Angelika Lutz?
Yes.
Because she was the singer who coached us for the performance.
Yes, I know her.
And is it true that you performed with Stockhausen as well?
Yes, I did.
And so most of the time he sat on the electronic regler of English. Traders. Anyhow. And sometimes she says, you try to figure out every subtleties and everything in their instrument and their voice, and he would just sit here and just turn it on and off as he wished. Is that true?
I mean, he was always very worried when we traveled and we played somewhere new, how this would be acoustic-wise. For instance, the little snippet was in the Duomo in Milano, so you can imagine big acoustics. So he would then spend 2 days just kind of trying to find, with on the sound mixing table, what needed to be done to really hear every detail that was necessary. So in that way, I never had the feeling that he's kind of cheating and making my sounds doing things.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but it's cheating.
No, I see what you mean, because then, and a lot depended on the performance he worked with, because often I've seen lots of performers come, work with him for a while, and then leave. So I think there was a very high anticipation always.
I think that it could be connected to his way of perceiving tone or timbre, because there are a couple of quotations that they may suggest he had synesthesia. I'm not sure whether it is true, because it should be like every time he heard something, then he had another way of perceiving it, but maybe this is somehow connected, and he was perceiving all of the colors and harmonies in a different way. That's why he was writing them down very, very specifically. Yeah, and Stimmung is not the only one that he was using this square of vowels where they are, and he was really, really specific in which way you should move those vowels and why. And it's really, really connected to how we really sing or we talk. So it's nothing like he was trying to adjust something, he was really connecting all of those things that he heard.
And always trying out what is possible. Can you kind of extend your boundaries as a performer, which was I learned so much in that way as well. Because at first you think this is not possible, but then you find ways.
It's the same with Aus den Sieben Tagen. When people saw the score, they were like, it's impossible to play it. And then he was trying with those people to do it, and suddenly, you could play it.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, I have more questions, but I think we see now in the concert. Thank you for coming, asking questions, and thank you for the beautiful presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.